Okay, now we're entering part 3 on the 7 ancient wonders of the world. If you haven't seen the other 2, it'll be at the end of whenever I stop this one or get through the 7. It'll be number 1, and you can go back again and start from the start of it, because it started with the Great Pyramids, and don't you want to hear about that and the ones that you've already missed? We're currently at the Colossus of Rhodes. It's basically an archaic Statue of Liberty. A giant bronze, gleaming naked man with perhaps a sash like Jesus, with a torch in one hand and a spear in the other, the light bringer, facing the eastern rising sun. Can you imagine a gleaming, radiant, giant statue of Jesus like resurrecting sun god looming over an important major harbor? And what emotions would people have for an important statue symbolizing rebirth and prosperity? Oh wait, again, think of the Statue of Liberty and its collective symbology. She, Diana the Huntress of Dawn, no longer carries a spear of destiny, but a book symbolizing the sharing of knowledge, which would have been a scroll not long before her inspirational. Later depictions show it legs spread out, spanning over the harbor, somehow teabagging ships as they enter, but that was never truly the case. So, thinking of the Statue of Liberty or looking at something like that, will actually think of another harbor. It looks that something that's gigantic statues like this, that's very Jesus-esque. In fact, Jesus himself, you can go to South America and Brazil, there's Jesus standing with not one arm out like this, but two, both arms out, beckoning wide open. Let's look at another depiction here of it. Hey, from the backside, ladies. And here's one depiction where they were saying, well, it kind of straddled the harbor. The problem with that is they would have had to have built a wall from one end of the harbor all the way into that, and then that's where he stood. And they might have had a place that you could come in like that, and maybe royalty and shit like that came through that little harbor. But to the right of that, all of that was just a wide open harbor where they all came in, and it's kind of crescent shaped, kind of a cul-de-sac type situation. That's the reason they say he wasn't out there. He was probably right here, even if he did have an effect like this, and he could occasionally teabag the ships as they came in. Like this depiction, where it's showing Colossus Solus, the sun god, as a giant, so it's the giant sun god, fixing to teabag that ship, looking like he's wearing a Jesus. But in this one, he doesn't have the spear and things, he's got bow and arrow, and he's holding a lamp or an urn in his hands. And what's weird about this depiction is they're kind of showing you that's the way it used to look, but now it looks like this. Here's the head of it on the ground, or this is them building it and the people that built it. No blonde and redheaded people, strangely, in the picture here, but let's continue. So this is that harbor we're talking about, and I'm at one side of that harbor, and we're looking across at the other, and that's the fortress at St. Nicholas right there. And so there's no way that that spanned it back in the day, and they don't find any archaeological record of it. He would have been on one side, and again, they could have made it to where you could go through his legs if you wanted to with his own little thing, but it didn't look like a lot of the depictions, and everybody that discusses this want to be real poignant about that. Here's a partially reconstructed temple ruins at the apex of the Colossus of Rhodes. So you can see the sea in the distance, but up here on the Acropolis area of it. Now, of course, there's more to it than that, but so that's the last picture that we have. So let's go back to this one as I finish off here. The Colossus of Rhodes. As it is impossible, it is believed to have stood on pediments on the side of the harbor, and the fort of the harbor today is made of the pre-carved stones of the Colossus. That fort is actually made of the pediment stones. It was said to have had taxed the copper and tin production of the entire world, and many believe this is another sign of the copper mining that happened in the New World, as the needed quantity would involve every known army's bronze weapons, armor, and more to create it at that time. The unimaginable feat still, even given what we know, Philo of Byzantium said it required the mining industry of the entire world. But how was it funded? Well, one tale says that the recently defeated Macedonian army weapons and armor were used, uh, boasting on how big the army was, and defeated as taken off the dead Macedonians after the war. And an extra large siege tower was used as its internal structure, made of wood, to hang the facade onto on the outside, like the Statue of Liberty is today, indicating it wasn't straddling the harbor unless they used two, one for each leg. Aha, well, that's possible. A man could barely touch fingers around one of its fingers. So by the time they had the thing busted down, one of its arms was out there, and the thing to do at the time was to come up to it and marvel how big it was and its thumbnail and crap, and people would try to put their arm around it and could barely, big men, could barely touch fingers around it. Other people couldn't, and it was like, can you or can you not touch fingers around it? So, it lasted through quite a few storms apparently, but after 56 years, a massive local earthquake destroyed the city and harbor, and the Colossus was said to have snapped at the knees, toppling it to the ground. They didn't rebuild, though, and an oracle warned not to. Even though it lay in ruins, a blemish now to the city, people still came to see it in pieces, lying beside the once great harbor. A finger was bigger than most statues, said by Pliny the Elder, and that he marveled at the sight, and that with it broken he could see vast cavernous areas inside the limbs and torso of the Colossus. In 653, during the Arab invasion, it was torn to pieces and carted away, taking hundreds of camels and ships, where it was returned to be resmelted into weapons, religious artifacts, tools, and coins, and other things, where some of it probably still exists today. How about that? Well, I think that kind of still stands up. Let's see if we can go back here. And the next one we're looking at is the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. How many minutes? 8 should be fine. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world listed by Hellenistic culture. That was the people in the time and everything. And of course, so many things are named by the Greeks, it's not even funny. But Hanging Gardens is actually a name derived from the Greek word kremastos, which means overhanging, which has a broader meaning than the most English word hanging gardens, and refers to trees being planted on a raised structure such as a terrace. It also could, by the way, mean hanging gardens as far as like hanging plants. You see, the Sumerians were also famous for agriculture and their green thumb, along with the Egyptians, of course, too, but the Sumerians were well known in their ability. In fact, looking back at history, they were the people that helped take a lot of the grains further from Proto-Europeans, where it all started at, and brought it to the next level of grains, where they're really putting out a whole lot more and so on. So there was even a genetics and a breeding kind of thing going on, along with other animals that they were dealing with too, but not yet the horse. But they talk about taking trees indoors. In fact, that's one of the ideas where we get from the Christmas tree, because they would take and get a tree and then end up being planted indoors and try to keep it alive there. It even describes in the Bible where these guys would chop down a tree and then come in and pin it so it wouldn't fall over and hold up, and then adorn it with gold and all kinds of things and try to call it a god or whatever. Well, that's funny, but thousands of years from now, probably people are going to go, what the hell was that? These people had these trees and they was a symbol of their god and rebirth and all these things. So that's exactly what they had going on with the tale of Inanna and Dumuzi and springtime and so on. And well, to knock the girl effect out of it and the boy girl yin and yang that rolled back and through in that story, they just turned around and did it the way we have nowadays with Jesus and so on. And it just works the same way. In fact, it's all equinoxial and it all works together. And you think that it all changed and everything was all pagan. Secretly, pagan really means agriculturist. Yeah, so does Ethiopian pretty much, but another thing. I will do a video about that here again shortly, but I already have a couple. But not all layers of the onion get left at one time, or opened up at one time. According to one legend, the Hanging Gardens were built alongside the grand palace known as the Marvel of Mankind, the Neo-Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled between 605 and 562 for his Median wife of the Medes, Queen Amethyst, because she missed the green hills and valleys of her homeland. Well, it was stated that she lived far to the northeast. And if we go with the idea of far to the northeast, how far is this? Where were the Medes at this time? Because they actually had moved around quite a bit. You can look at old maps and say, well, they're here and then they're there, and then it's hooked up, and then all of a sudden they're above the Persians, and she missed the valleys and rich lushness of her homeland, and so to appease her, he built a garden. A lot of people do this at their house. It may be a vegetable garden, and then also you might have done other things. One other symbolic thing that these Aryans used to do was go and plant a tree. And you hear modern days everything, oh, plant a tree, save the world, and all this type of stuff. Yeah, they were the first people over at Johnny Appleseed going around planting a tree. So they'd have these things. What did they want? Well, sometimes it was a date tree, this, that, and the other. An apple tree was real popular too, as it was with Johnny Appleseed. But that's for another video. But she loved her homeland. This was attested to by the Babylonian priest Berosus, writing about it in 290 BC, so people can probably believe in that a little more. A description that was later quoted by Josephus, so he turned around and he agreed with it, whether he knew about it or not. The construction of the Hanging Gardens has also been attributed to the legendary queen Semiramis, who supposedly ruled Babylon in the 9th century BC, and they've been called the Hanging Gardens of Semiramis as an alternative name. It's possible that these are actually two and one and the same ideal, and these Hanging Gardens of Babylon didn't last for one generation of people, or even a portion of it like they insist to try to put across to people. They had been famous for generations before people started talking about them. Not only were these guys able to build great architecture around in places and also have great agriculture out in places, they mixed the two together and did something like we would think of as Central Park, and actually made in the city some of the wild still left into it. Yeah, so there's shade trees and all these things going on, and waterfalls. How did they accomplish all that? Well, let's look into this here, what I've got. And believe me, like I said, I've got just all kinds of notes, crap written all over the side. This was a long time before. It was really just cliff notes, if you will, and something that I believe I was inspired by watching In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy about it once, and then I sat down and wrote 12 pages worth of crap. Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a garden oasis in the desert. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me put it on a picture that goes with it. Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Oh, by the way, in the distance here on the left, you're seeing the Tower of Babel. Oh no. Oh no. But when it gets to the 13th floor, it tumbles down. God doesn't want them to get up to the clouds so he can reach them. And then he mumbles everybody, because if he keeps them where they can have the same speech, there's no telling what they could do, and it scared the gods themselves. Isn't that crazy? Built by a famed king, or said to be by Nebuchadnezzar for his homesick wife from foreign lands, a priestess from the mountains of the northeast, she craved the cool running streams and rain and lush trees of flowers from her distant homeland. So was she in the Ghitan area, Scythian area, or even perhaps Oriental? Well, it looks like Scythian type. She's also known to have been a Medes type, and her name kind of reflects that nomenclature. King Ashurbanipal said that the waterfalls glistened like stars, and the fragrant trees and fruit trees smelled like they wafted on the cool air, or the fruit trees' smells wafted on the cool air over thousands of years after people were still reporting on the sprawling, park-like environmental Eden-esque hanging gardens around the main buildings. In Texas, think of the Riverwalk in San Antonio, a kind of oasis in the desert southwest. Or you can think of Japanese gardens and parks, or even the Augusta National Golf Course. It's a Eden-esque like Central Park. Or you can think of Central Park. How is it watered and how is it plumbed? Well, though it's contested, Strabo noted that well before Archimedes' screw, Arca meaning ancient, Medes, whom Theodotus said were the Aryans of ancient time, as all people of the area were until Media came from Athens and they changed their name, just as Persia did when Persians came. Strabo noted that a water screw was used to get the water to the top. Well, when you look at Archimedes and we say that she had something to do with the Medes, perhaps there's a little more of this story on how they went together and got this water up there, and the Medes are hooked up with Archimedes and so on, isn't there, guys? Aqueducts were made through it. There were gutters, there were channels and waterfalls. They would flow down to pools which fed many rivers to other terraces and down and back into the Euphrates. Sennacherib used the water screw at his palace gardens. He said that his gardens were a wonder to all, but that would be in Nineveh. Or did others just make their other ones like it, and did others follow suit? And whenever they say there were ancient hanging gardens in Babylon, if I said there were ancient hanging gardens in Assyria, or there were ancient hanging gardens in Sumeria, or Sumer, would that not indicate it may be bigger than just in one city? But that one city is what we all know, right? We probably all agree that it was probably this one site that was incredible with it, but probably it got echoed in every city in some fashion or form or another, right? It was the Shangri-La beneath a desert moon, an oasis, a Garden of Eden in a now fast becoming desert land. What do I have over here at the side? There was an ancient joke too, and believe me, it was anciently written as a joke, and I've never seen it inscribed actually or anything, but it was said that the women went around watering the garden and doing things, and there were hanging baskets that had plants growing in them like we do nowadays, and hang up on our awnings and things that were all around, and they would go to water them, and they were topless. And the joke was, you got to see the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Da-doonch. Like it was some kind of old world Hooters or something, guys. But again, that's surely got to be just a joke. Well, I'll be damned, maybe not. So this is looking at a painting of what it would look like as these maidens are all hanging around, and yeah, she's got a jaguar, and what it would have looked like hanging around in the gardens of Babylon. And so what are they talking about? Well, do you see all the potted plants? They've brought all this lushness in. In fact, they can make a big old square, and if it's deep enough to let a taproot of a tree work out, they can do that. And on the grounds area down there, they can just go through the base rock, fill it all full of soil around a tree that they grab someplace and rip up, and might get it to live there too. Run water into it. Have these maidens go around, and once a week, every one of them carries a jug to these places and waters it and things like that. Once a day, they water certain places. Once a day, they do this. Once a day, they do that. Once a day, during a special afternoon time, they sit down in the cool of the day, beat tambourines and sing songs, and just sit around giggling and looking hot. Here's another idea of a depiction of what it might have looked like. Somebody carved on something, and they're saying, well, it's not even really, it was Babylon was surrounded. Well, it looks like pot leaves over here. It was all surrounded by pot. No, it was all surrounded by trees, which literally, that looks like bushes and pine trees, but surrounded by pine trees and a forest that they, in this area, it was no longer going. They didn't have a good forest. They had to go north and get cedar trees and everything. We've talked about that so much in the Egyptians too. But these people surplanted and got a forest going. They took seedlings and everything and got it all going and then kept it. There's also a story in Persia where he had done this exact same thing. In fact, there are remnants of it still here. This little micro aqueducts taking water down and stuff. And apparently these girls would come along and pour water into this one thing every day, and it would go around and water everything. Yeah. Got to skip a day if it rained. How often did it rain in ancient Persia? Well, a little more than it does now, but not much. And as it faded away, most of those people left and they went other places. Genetics shows you where they ended up. So here's another graphic depiction of somebody standing in a castle, and the castle is surrounded by trees and bushes and even growing on the second level up there. So yeah, it's kind of a terracing type effect too, but also the town wasn't stripped bare and just concrete. They had a lot of greenery going on. Something like you see today, and you see all of these palm trees going on and stuff. Would it have been more than that? Yeah, probably a grouping of other plants down below the palm trees, but something very much like this. Pretty floral. The place we're talking about. Here they are laying in the cool of the day. That's pretty neat. And people coming along to serve him. His wife's drinking soup or something, and she's being fanned and having the flies kept off of her course. Same thing going on with him. Royalty. Nearby is his hunting weapons. I think that's it. Yep, that's the last picture on it here. So it was written about by Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, Quintius, Curtius Rufus, a few other people. Sennacherib built his capital in Nineveh on the river Tigris near the modern city of Mosul, and he was known to have had a garden kick off of it too. It's kind of also, by the way, where we get an idea of a Garden of Eden from and the whole hookup to it and how that all works out secretly. Is it really that much of a secret? Can't you see it? The Bible it starts out in the garden, right? Let's continue on to number 7 and see if we can get it in here. We should be able to get it in the time allotted on this last one. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, sometimes called the Pharos of Alexandria. Pharaohs, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Well, yeah, very much like it. It's an island hooked up off of it, and its name was Pharos Island. There's also a Pharos Island way up over here near Ireland and stuff. Yeah. So for the same purpose, probably so. It's connective of it. So anyhow, so it's the Lighthouse of Alexandria. A lot of people know about this. It's been estimated to be at least 100 meters or 330 foot tall. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and for many centuries was one of the tallest man-made structures in the world. And it actually was the tallest usable daily modern day structure in the world. Nobody's going up on the pyramid daily or anything like that. The lighthouse was severely damaged by 3 earthquakes between 956 and 1323 AD and abandoned to ruin. You see, all these things kept happening back then. Of course, they blame it on God or their lack of worshiping or who knows what off of it, but crap happened. So it was the 3rd longest living natural wonder after the Mausoleum at Helicarnassus, which we just recently talked about. So as they folded one by one, this was 5th, the mausoleum was 6th, and the pyramids still stand. Just like the Greeks said, time may ruin all, but the pyramids will still be standing. In 1994, a French team archaeologist dove the water off Alexandria's eastern harbor and discovered some remains of the lighthouse on the seafloor. And in 2016, Ministry State of Antiquities in Egypt had plans to turn submerged ruins of ancient Alexandria, including those of the Pharos Island, into an underwater museum kind of thing. But I don't think they ever got it quite going. So here's Alexandria. Looking at it from the smaller picture here, as it hooks over here, finger of God, as it hooks over here at the right-hand corner here, there's Israel and stuff that we have nowadays, but as it comes in and gets that hump that's actually where the delta comes out and spreads, we have Alexandria. That wasn't the most stable of land in the first place, but you get a couple of earthquakes up under it, and it will take one of those things out like crazy. Here we see another sun goddess type worshiping thing going on the top of it, just topped by a cone like a pyramid. And then inside of that, which is like a temple, was this light that was kept and kept going every night, allowed to die off each day, and then brought it back by light. We'll talk about it more here in a minute, but that tower that the light was in was already on another tower that all stood up like this, that was on a big base. There was a whole setup to begin with. Wasn't a lighthouse where you open the door and there's just a curlicue stairway going to the top and a light. This thing was huge. In fact, if you'll look, each one of these is a story with windows in it. Doom, 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 doom. Compare the boat over there and so on. The Lighthouse at Alexandria. Built on Pharos Islands in the Delta Harbor of ancient Egypt, it was a beacon to the maritime trade of the time, fueled by wood and oil from the north, and magnified by polished bronze mirrors. It said it could be seen from 30 miles out to sea. And one report even said that the spotlight beam rendered one blind for minutes or could even set ships on fire. Slowly over time, it developed quite a story of, hey, if you were going over there to fight them, that light, if they just concentrated on you, kind of like the Eye of Sauron, that they could direct a beam and kind of check you out, but that beam might as well have been the Eye of Sauron. It's kind of like the famous death ray of Archimedes, and here we go again. We talk about Archimedes, don't we? Yeah, again we're speaking about Archimedes, who revealed assortment, as I said before, of previously known inventions and improvements of the ancient Aryan world. So it was like the lanterns of the time, though, that had a wind blocker on it, but necessarily it also had a reflecting mirror behind it, directing more of the light back and front of you, like a car headlight, like a spotlight that shone in the darkness for over 1,700 years, finally succumbing to a direct or localized earthquake during the 14th century, which before it was a light in the darkness, like a guiding star for all Mediterranean travelers and for a large portion of humanity. Again, I see the Colossus of Rhodes, I see the Statue of Liberty, that torch held high. They said it was over 30 stories tall. It was facaded, at least made out of marble on the outside, though it may be of solid marble, but doubtful. It was the tallest building of use until modern day skyscrapers, believe it or not. It's believed also the wood came from Anatolian patrons, or some have even said that they had some type of magic that they would conjure up each evening and then it would glow all night long. That off of that glow they could simply look into a scrying orb, which is a crystal ball, at another location and see out of that lighthouse. Yet there's another story where they actually captured a falling star, or the power of a falling star, and they could open the box and it would shine out every evening. Most of this is probably bullshit, but you know how myths get started. And that's another way of showing you just how famous this thing was and how important it was and how people said different things. There's another story where they said all the way across at Anatolia, yeah, all the way over there where the other armored things are, that after nighttime and the nighttime settled, you would see a star. How you would get to Egypt from there, let me rephrase this, was from that point you would see a star over there along the horizon. And as the horizon pivots up and slowly spins across the sky at night, that star would stay still. Yeah. Now here's another one for you. Because there was two other stars, which you were standing in Anatolia, to your left right there, which would have been Sidon, and farther down another, the ancient Maritimers would say, second star to the right, on till morning. Have you ever heard that? I'm certain I have. This is a remarkable list, though, of people's achievements. And while somebody would think, how does a lighthouse pale in comparison to the Egyptian pyramids? Well, the pyramids are standing there as kind of a symbol of man's ability and achievement well before all these other ones were even built. So it stands alone while it stands as the pinnacle of these seven. And if you look, a lot of these as the seven on their pinnacle are showing a type of pyramid object, showing you that, well, it's all about sacred geometry and all these things. It hooks up to the heavens and everything. It's all of that and a bag of chips. It's amazing. We'll get through the pictures of it here and the possibilities of what it looked like. This giant mirror, reflecting mirror. Did they have another mirror that was concave they could whip out there real quick and start zapping you with it if you came close and see who was who or what was what? Here's depictions on coins even where it's not probably an accurate depiction at all. Here it just looks like a tower that might be 20 foot tall with a little cup of light on top of it, and there's a couple of guys putting fire in there watching it. I'm certain that's not it. Here's another picture. Oh, it's not on the other side of the same coin though, but it's showing again the ship and the lighthouse. But the ship's as tall as the lighthouse. Well, they're just trying to put it on a coin. Here's another depiction of somebody standing at the top of the lighthouse and keeping it going, and apparently he's a sun god. And he's got his sword and he's making this happen, and people talked about that jewel or a meteorite that fell in a falling star. Let me know what you think about that downstairs. The way it may have looked in two different depictions. Here's some of the archaeology up under the water, right there in the harbor, and they find pieces of it right there, and they've said, yeah, this has to have been parts of the ancient Lighthouse of Alexandria. There's another picture who shows it in more of a, it was listed in a Book of Wonders in the 14th century Arabic text, and in Arabic you can see it kind of made in an Arabic way. And up here on top there's a lady sitting there with a mirror, and that has something else to do with it. Here's another depiction, right? Said which it was supposed to have been modeled after it, much smaller. You see depictions in lighthouses like this sometimes, or this. So this famed Lighthouse of Alexandria, of course this had something to do with Alexander the Great, and there we have to have something attached to that was from that situation, and here we have that one. It's a remarkable list of people and achievements. Some may seem out of place, with pyramids, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, Temple of Artemis, Mausoleum, the Colossus of Rhodes, Hanging Gardens of Babylon, or the Lighthouse of Alexandria. But I sure did whenever I was younger, and believe it or not, that's what it says right here on this page that I wrote whenever I was younger, much younger than now. And I'm saying whenever I was younger, I thought that was kind of like, what? Some of those aren't really worthy of it. But the pyramids stand by themselves, and I could talk for an hour about them. Let's not. The statue of Zeus, symbolizing reverence, really in ourselves, in our past, as gods of this earth and caretakers of the earth, and the example we set by having gods of ourselves, something to live up to. The expectations of somebody like your father, but it's even got control over him and far before. That's deeper than I let on when I said it right then. So, the Temple of Artemis, Diana and Nana, it's also reverence for mothers and women in general, and the fairy godmother of us all. It's one of those things where you can say it a couple of different ways. The fairy godmother, or, the godmother of your children and all that, she is the famed fairy godmother of us all. She's that Queen of Heaven. The Mausoleum of Helicarnassus is an incredible devotion to love and family, as all saw it, said so, and like that of the Taj Mahal and others built, it actually goes much deeper than that. The Colossus of Rhodes, a shining beacon like a lighthouse of knowledge, like our Statue of Liberty, like the lighthouse we're looking at right now, but each one meaning their own thing. The Hanging Gardens, a symbol of ingenuity and man's incessant need to please women, pleases everyone eventually and makes a little Garden of Eden for the two of them and more. enriching all. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, a symbol of maritime championship and a beacon of knowledge in Alexandria, city of the famed library in Alexander the Great, and the first human settlement that actually ever reached 1 million people. I could continue to go on. We could go into the modern day 7 list that we have there, but hey, do me a favor, down there in the list, think of something of ancient times and add on what should be added to the 7 ancient wonders of the ancient world. And hey, if you've got one for the modern world, what's your 7 ancient or 7 wonders of the modern world? And hey, let's do a kind of this way. If you took everything from the pyramids all the way till now, what would be your 7 symbols of mankind's great achievements? Like these are the great achievements, but also have the symbology behind it. It can't just be a straight achievement, though. I mean, you wouldn't have something like this in the pyramids and then a wheel just sitting next to it, but in reality, that wheel is almost as important as the pyramid. I mean, if you think about things and the way everything plays out, isn't it? Give me your list down below. I'm quite interested in it. Might make a video out of what y'all put down there. Let me know. Peace.